A note to listeners. The following podcast contains content that may not be suitable for all audiences.
Okay, so this is going to be a first time exclusive I've ever shown these letters to anybody, including you guys, actually.
Yeah.
Everybody has kind of heard about the name Richard SHUPMAN, who was one of the guys at CMC where they met and they, came up with this plan of taking the van, up in the mountains. So he was part of this sexual deviant group in that prison. And he was the one, he was mentioned in the doc. So they actually went up on the fire road. You see those famous pictures of like Roy pointing and like BITTAKER bending down to break the fire lock. They sent these into SHUPMAN saying like, oh, we found a great spot to go camping. It's so secluded. This is their cue to SHUPMAN, like, hey, we're going through with the plan.
You are listening to Partners in True Crime. We are your hosts, Rob and Cindy Dorfman. Hi everyone, if you're enjoying the podcast, please leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts, even if it's one word.
And please subscribe to our website, www.partnersintruecrime. Follow us on TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram to check out our weekly promos. We're also now on YouTube at Partners in True Crime. If you subscribe to our website, you'll be getting weekly emails from us and all kinds of promotions and things that we don't advertise on the podcast.
We appreciate all the great reviews, so please keep them coming as well. Just go on to Apple Podcasts or Spotify, drop us a review, subscribe, and tell your friends about what we're doing. Also, feel free to take pieces of the podcast, share with others. Our goal is to get the word out to as many people as possible, so thank you. Also, we are currently looking into the case of another young victim in Oklahoma, which seems very suspicious. 8 months ago, on September 4th, Noah Presgrove was 19 years old when he was found dead on a highway near Terrell, Oklahoma.
His family is still looking for answers to find out what happened in Noah's horrible death, and we are talking to them. In the coming weeks, we will be launching the What Happened to Noah Presgrove podcast, where we will go through the facts of the case with the family and try to help them find some answers. Check out announcements on Partners in True Crime for further information.
Before Lawrence BITTAKER and Roy Norris teamed up in the late 70s and early 80s to murder and rape innocent young girls, they spent time together in the California Men's Colony, or CMC.
It was at CMC that they started planning on what they were going to do when they were let out on parole. But they weren't the only ones planning and fantasizing about sadistic serial killing acts.
According to Laura's interviews with BITTAKER, there was a group of offenders that hung out together to discuss these plans. One was Joe Jackson, who we have spoken of before on this podcast.
One of the others was a man named Richard SHUPMAN. Laura corresponded with SHUPMAN up until he died in prison in 2020, not long after BITTAKER and Norris.
Today, Laura is going to share the contents of some of the letters he wrote to Laura in which he discusses both BITTAKER and Norris. Most of the content is very graphic, which we will not share, but some of it reveals a lot about the Toolbox Killers and even more about Richard SHUPMAN. Okay, so we're back with Laura, and today we have some interesting stuff that Laura wants to share with us, and it's BITTAKER and Norris related. And so, Laura, why don't you kind of tee up what we're going to be talking about today and these infamous letters that you've shown us?
Yeah. Okay. So this is going to be a first time exclusive I've ever shown these letters to anybody, including you guys, actually.
Yeah.
Everybody has kind of heard about the name Richard SHUPMAN, who was one of the guys at CMC where they met and they, came up with this plan of taking the van up in the mountains. So he was part of this sexual deviant group in that prison. Joe Jackson was part of it. There was actually, frightening enough, a few other guys a part of it who also got parole at the same time Larry and Roy did as well. So right after Larry died, right before, I should say, he said, reach, if you have any more questions, go to SHUPMAN. So right after Larry died, Roy died, and then I found SHUPMAN. And ironically, he was down at Donovan where Norris was. So Norris and SHUPMAN actually got reunited back together.
Wow.
Crazy enough.
That's crazy.
Really crazy. So I had wrote him and I just started asking just basic questions and diving in deeper into the case. And the first letter I got back, I sent him a picture of me and Larry. So he knew it wasn't like, bullshit. It was all truth. Mm-hmm. And the first thing he said back is like, oh my God, like, I can't believe it because you're blonde hair, blue eyes. And he was like, Larry because I, disclosed to him stuff that Larry had told me. And he's like, really? You're the one that broke him? Like, you're the one that opened him up? And I was like, yeah. And so I started asking him more questions, and we corresponded for a while. We talked on the phone, and for the first time ever, I want to share some of these letters, especially his last letter to me and to you guys, because it's a big piece of this entire puzzle too.
Yeah. So just to be clear, this guy, along with Norris, BITTAKER, Joe Jackson, they were all at CMC. How much time did they spend together?
Years together.
And so this is like part of their coffee talk that they would have on planning on what they're going to do when they get on the outside, or fantasizing this band of rapists and killers.
100%. Norris said to me, he described it as locker room talk. I was like, that's prison locker room talk. So They were all housed on D Block at CMC, but they were all at the hobby shop, which is where they kind of like all congregated in the yard too, the wood shop. Because Roy liked to make gemstones. This is where the jewelry making comes into play. But yeah, these sexual deviants would come together and make jewelry and talk about their sexual fantasies. But what I've discovered is a lot of this stuff was not fantasy. This was actually a lot of based on real stuff, which is even crazier. But they disguised it as fantasies. Yeah. So this is my correspondence with Richard Shupman, and he did testify at the trial. And he was the one, he was mentioned in the doc. So they actually went up on the fire road. You see those famous pictures of like Roy pointing and like BITTAKER bending down to break the fire lock. They sent these into Shupman saying like, oh, we found a great spot to go camping. It's so secluded. This was their cue to Shupman, like, hey, we're going through with the plan. And they actually sent Shupman actual pictures of the victims. And Shupman had, that's why Shupman was called. They had to do a search of Shupman's cell and at CMC, because Shupman actually had pictures of BITTAKER and Norris with the victims.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because back then, pornography was, allowed in prison. So it wasn't like it didn't get, they just thought it was just pornography being sent in. Yeah, they didn't think it was anything suspect. And then it's like, oh, we're just going camping. Look at this spot. It's so cool. Nobody thought anything suspect of it at the time until they were arrested. So after they died, I listened to Larry and I said, okay, I'm going to reach out to Shupman. I found him at Donovan where Norris was, and he was just shocked by what I looked like. But then I started saying, I started just with simple questions, how did you meet Roy? And he says, at CMC, we're on D Block. How did you meet Larry? He says the same thing. And he starts talking about how genius Larry was and how sophisticated he was. And he was very sophisticated about prison, where Roy wasn't. So BITTAKER was actually selling marijuana throughout the prison. And even when BITTAKER got out before them, he was actually mailing marijuana into the prison under a fake business name. I mean, this is, we're talking about in the 70s. But yeah, BITTAKER did that. So he mailed Shupman, and I'm talking about a lot of marijuana was getting sent.
How did that get, they didn't,
I don't know. 70s. It's the 70s, right. I have no idea. And BITTAKER told me, he was like, I got this post office box, the fake LLC. He told me like I actually have a tape of him breaking it down of exactly how he did it. But yeah. So then Shupman's talking about how, just genius Larry was, but he says that he was very condescending. He could be arrogant about his, intelligence. But he actually talks about his love for Norris and how he owes Norris a lot, because Norris, I guess, did a lot for him in prison. He wasn't making a lot of money. He was, so Shupman later, he was selling these perverted sexual fantasies, actually true. But that's how he was making his money. And then he was doing law advice later on for other inmates and charging. Let's see, but I'll get into the one thing I did not know is Shupman told me that actually when Norris got really sick, he was sent to Vacaville, which we know who is at Vacaville now.
Really interesting.
Very interesting. It all leads back to San Quentin Vacaville. Let's see. I said, what was Larry's personality like? He said, that's a tough question. First of all, he was a effing genius. He really was, and I mean that. The problem is he would always come up with a solution to any problem. The only bad part is he was a know-it-all, very condescending, and always giving advice when not needed. His handwriting is very hard to read. He was something of stuck-up, but maybe that's just my insecurity of myself. So that's what he's about. Larry's personality. He describes Roy's personality as really friendly, but not prison savvy at all.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
The suck up part.
Especially because they were both career criminals too. Both Larry and Robert. Mm-hmm.
I was going to say the whole thing where he says Larry was a suck up. I think that was probably a manipulation tactic.
You think of Larry or Shupman in this letter?
Who is Shupman saying that Larry was a suck up?
Yeah.
I think that he may be using that as a manipulation tactic to ingratiate himself to people so he has them on their side.
No, I think you're right, because I was like, I didn't get that vibe from BITTAKER, but then I was always going toe to toe with him. So, but I could, you know what I mean? So,
but amongst his peers and people that are more powerful than him, because he wasn't a big guy, you know, why not? You know.
Well, I mean, that's what Manson. Look at Manson. Manson was smaller than me. I always tell people.
I know. I stood toe to toe with him. He was like, I was looking at through the thing. He was like almost 5 inches smaller than me.
He was an elf, they said, like on the stand. Yeah. I said, do you have any fond memories of either of them? I could appreciate Larry's mind. He's going back to the intelligence. Mine was a 124. So I do see some insecurities with him against Larry. And by the way, a lot of people think that Roy was a dummy. Roy was not. Roy was high superior. He was 125 for the record. I mean, they were both intelligent. Yeah. 140 is genius, Mensa. So Larry was 138. Roy was 125. He wasn't a dummy. I mean, comparatively, that may seem like, Roy was kind of the dummy against BITTAKER, but he wasn't a dummy by any means.
What's his name? Say his name again?
Shupman. Richard Shupman.
What was Shupman in prison for?
So he is in prison for the murder of a co-ed at San Diego, a vicious murder, just one murder, but we're going to get more into that later.
When he met them, though, was he in CMC? That was why he was there?
That was why he was there, yes. Yeah. Let's see.
Was there any other rumors of him killing more people? And that was just the one he got. We're gonna get
very deep into that. When I meet Roy, I think it's coming up, actually. So this is 2.
We're not posting these letters because there's people out there who sell these things. And we're not gonna support that. So
Well, you know what? I guess I'll jump. Well, I'll show this right now because it's not going to take away from anything. Well, I'm not going to show it actually because I don't want people screenshotting it, or I don't know. I'll leave this up to you guys. It's the wanted ad by the FBI for Richard Shupman for murder in Virginia. So his murder that he's convicted on is in San Diego. This is a murder in Virginia. He was wanted by the FBI, so he traveled cross country.
What time difference was it? Like how many years?
I would literally need a magnifying glass because it's the literal wanted poster by the FBI.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. But
I think you can show that. I think that's fine to show.
That's okay.
Yeah, that's okay. Just the letters.
I mean, this is just you could probably get this online.
Well, you can send us. It's great. We can kind of loop it in. Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
So we know he was wanted by the FBI for a possible murder in Virginia, but he was convicted of a murder of a college co-ed in San Diego, and he traveled cross country. Oh, so I asked him about the fire road of the gate. He goes, when Larry sent that picture to me, they said that was them explaining that they were going camping up there, and it was a very private, quote unquote private, and they wouldn't have any interruptions. So that was exactly what they were to shoot when they sent that letter back to them.
I think it's just really interesting how they kept him in the loop on all their stuff.
Oh,
everything. It's like he probably said, "Let me know what you're doing."
No, he really was like a secret third member for them. Yeah.
What did BITTAKER say about him though?
Oh, he said he was totally involved. Like they were sending him letters. He was part of like all the sexual fantasies back at CMC. And then when he was dying, he said, go to him if you have any more questions. So, I mean, that should tell you enough right there.
Yeah.
Did Larry send me pictures of Andrea when she found out he was going to kill her. I'm not going to go into the details of these pictures.
No.
That's
No.
horrible.
Yeah.
But
And
he lays it all out for you.
he lays it all out. Yeah. Even more disturbing is that I later asked him, were all these pictures recovered? Because they did send people to go find these photos, and he says no, because I was renting these pictures out. And I called Stephen K. and I said, not all the pictures that BITTAKER Norris took were recovered at CMC. SHUPMAN was renting them out. And he's like, you've got to be kidding me. So thankfully, because San Quentin is dismantling, I have a lot of offenders now at CMC, and they've been put on a mission to try to recover these photos. I know it sounds like impossible. They're like, okay, back from 79. But you got to remember, even at San Quentin. So when they were dismantling San Quentin's death row, all the cell phones and all the porn dropped to like 75% off type of deal. Because they're leaving, they can't bring the cell phones, they can't bring the porn. So a lot of it, everything was left behind, trashed, destroyed. So photographs like this could still be in a prison. They would just be circulating because they can't take them out, they can't transfer them.
Right.
They would just be given to another inmate and kept inside the prison. And if they had already been found, they would have already been turned over to the police and the prosecutor, which they have not been. So right now, all my offenders that have transferred to CMC are on the lookout for very specific photographs if they are still, within CMC.
They could still be there.
It could be. They do. Porn does stay within the prison. So hopefully we can recover them. I asked him, was he surprised about the crime? He said, no. Huge letters, exclamation point. The boys were both on parole. And before that, we had spent years talking and spending time about what they were going to do. It shows on the meditation. Yep. We would write stories. Prison is a school for criminals. Very true.
I just find it fascinating how they included him on this stuff, not knowing, what their end result was going to be. And, because it's including more people with information that could lead to their arrest, it's like.
Exactly.
They say there's only, the only way 3 people can keep a secret is if 2 are dead.
Right, exactly. I'm gonna read this next paragraph to you. I'm just gonna read it. Okay, so personally, I am convicted for a first-degree murder. Of course, I talked to my friends about my case and how I did it. I don't know if you're old enough to remember it, but back in the 70s and 80s, hitchhiking was real common. My thing was to pick up hitchhiking girls. I was only in my 20s, sort of fat, with glasses, and came across very unsuspecting. So he says this is where he failed. But then I brought a friend in who got cold feet and turned me in.
Huh. Have you ever encountered anything like this? So he was trying to pair up with someone, and then you have BITTAKER and Norris who are a pair. Now they're a throuple because the 3 of them are doing
literally
right?
a throuple.
So it is.
Well, then Joe Jackson.
And then there's Joe Jackson.
Well,
so
there's Jackson. It's like, I know. By the way, Jackson was in D Block with them in their little, jewelry making, whatever. Yeah.
Why would they risk having a partner like that?
Well, this is actually very typical for sexual sadists. It ups the thrill for them when they have a partner or something they can share with.
And they share.
This is upping the ante for them. This is
it's an audience.
Exactly.
It's performative.
This is why a lot of them take cassette tapes, videotapes. This is very common for sexual sadists. They want to relive it. They want to share it with the other person. And that's why they flock together. That's why you're seeing the tombstones. Look at Indian Lake and Shermantine. It's just look at all these cases. They love that. Upping the ante of sharing it it's sickly. And with BITTAKER and Norris, everyone always thought it was just BITTAKER and Norris, but now you learn Jackson was involved, and now SHUPMAN was kind of like a silent partner in prison, still, vicariously living through their crimes, with the pictures and the letters and everything. And the problem was that Larry and Roy used the hitchhiker trick, but the DA put them against each other as co-defendant. And that's what did them in. So putting them against each other. Yeah. Did I get together with Roy in here? Sure. I actually lived in the same building with him, and we got together for hours. This is after his arrest, too.
Wow.
Yeah. What do you mean by get together? What does that mean? Just hang
Making
out?
jewelry and talking about their crimes, I guess. I mean,
what a strange group. Jewelry making serial killers.
And it was more than just Jackson, BITTAKER, Norris, and SHUPMAN, actually, which is even more just.
Did SHUPMAN say anything about Knott's Berry Farm?
That's coming up, actually. Where is that part, actually? All right, so this is the last of remembering. I'm trying to skip over the graphic parts.
But he goes into graphic detail and all this stuff.
That's why I'm like skimming it, because I want to make sure before I read it. But yeah, I do ask him about Knott's Berry. I ask him about a lot of stuff.
What was your reaction when you received these letters?
Shocked. I mean, shocked, but not shocked. Like, I already knew about the, their group because, Roy and BITTAKER had told me. But I was very shocked by some of the stuff SHUPMAN had said. I think I'm missing the first letter, but I was looking. But the first letter, well, I mean, you can tell from, him being wanted by the FBI in Virginia and him talking about the hitchhikers and how he was fat and nerdy and unassuming, picking up hitchhikers. Obviously, one of the first questions I asked him was, "Are you a serial killer as well?" So
what was his answer?
That's coming. That is coming.
Wow.
Yeah.
He's not still alive, is he?
No, he died right after these letters. The last letter he wrote me is the last letter he ever wrote.
Wow. What year did he die?
2020. Right after BITTAKER and Norris. Which
they all died around
the same time. They all died together.
Except Joe Jackson.
Yeah, Joe Jackson.
Except for Joe. Joe is still alive.
He's still floating around somewhere.
He is still floating around. Let's see, what question was this? Oh, I asked them. BITTAKER and Norris couldn't remember the Ice Pick Through the Ear movie. So I asked SHUPMAN if he remembered the exact movie. He said, "No, I don't remember the name of the movie." With the Ice Pick Through the Ear, he goes, "I remember watching it with them. It was in the late 70s. The plot was a group of girls, college age, were on a yacht in the Mediterranean, and the boat was hijacked. At least one of the girls was killed with an ice pick to the ear. I remember that we all talked about it. Everyone knew how much it hurts to get anything stuck in your ear. We all think." I'm not going to read the next part.
No, don't. Please don't. It's awful. It just even thinking about what's really disturbing is that they picked this up from a movie.
I know, right? Like for them to be like watching a movie. Right. That's what I feel fun about too. And for them to go, it really hurts to go through the ear because when you talk to an eardrum,
do that.
Let's do that. Yeah.
Like how does that happen?
Inspiration.
Like your brain.
They got
all
inspired.
Of a sudden is now right.
Yeah.
These are the two connections that we make. That's why we never want to give anybody any ideas.
No.
That way. Okay, so he was never convicted for anyone except that one girl.
That one girl.
And how many do you think he was involved in?
We'll get there. Trust me. All these
sorry, I'm like jumping ahead,
guys. All the viewers are probably asking these same questions.
I'm like, what?
I'm going to reveal it. Yeah, at the end.
There you go. Okay.
That's why I said I'm going to withhold the last letter from you.
All right.
I know. I can't take it. Tell me, what is it?
Let's see. So this part, he keeps talking about how much he loves Roy, which is really weird.
Were they having like a homosexual relationship?
I don't know, because that was always, speculated about, BITTAKER and Roy. And that is typical for sexual sadists too, is they will cross lines. Like for them, it's just, it doesn't matter.
Right.
Yeah.
Very typical.
Why would there be any kind of lines for these guys?
No, and actually a lot of sexual sadists have reported to me it's actually an up from a female, because when they dominate a male, it's even more powerful to them, which is what they're seeking, is the power.
Yeah.
So they're much more likely to actually go after a male because that's the greatest quote unquote power to them, is to dominate a male. So yeah, it is very likely. I don't know. They're all making jewelry together in prisons.
So bizarre. Have you ever seen any of the jewelry?
No.
So weird.
And what would they do with the jewelry? Was that the stuff that they would sell?
I think they would sell it, and then you heard Kristen. Roy had that box of rings when they pulled over, and he was trying to sell it, but it was like a ruse. I don't know. I don't know. It's weird.
Well, I just think it's interesting because they saw that movie. Bittaker saw that movie too, yeah.
hmm
And then
They
he
all
grew up. He grew up next to the tool man,
Yeah.
which is so creepy to me. It really
Mhm.
it really sets in that, like, when you're a child,
Too many metaphors
all the impressions that you're taking in as a child.
Right. And then
I would love to talk to that neighbor, like,
I
just
would
to
have
see.
loved, if I could have interviewed anybody on this case, his adoptive parents.
Yeah.
I would have
Oh, yeah.
loved to have, talked to his adoptive parents and seen, hear their side of the story of what he was like as a child and everything. And, with Norris, I mean, he really had a really good upbringing. Like he had a great mother, which we heard from his cousin and,
Yeah.
his sister too. And the only thing, and when I said, because there's all this misinformation online about Bittaker and Norris growing in foster care, all false. None of them were ever in foster care. Bittaker was adopted within the family. There was no like foster care system. There was no abuse. There was no sexual abuse. There was no physical abuse. Bittaker was neglected, and he is correct, because I did find a report from a social worker that says she did find neglect within that family. Okay, but Norris was the opposite. He had a really good family. The only thing, and Norris said that to me, he was like, I had a great family. He goes, I would go to the roller rink with my sister every Friday. We had the best time. And I was like, so what the hell happened? Like,
Right. What happened?
What happened? And he would say to me, the only thing he reported to me, he was like, the only thing I can think of, Laura, is, my grandparents would come over and degrade my mother. They would call her a whore, a bitch, a slut. And I'm like, well, that's pretty significant. Your grandparents, degrading the female figure in a sexualized fashion, especially, that can have profound effects. I mean, it doesn't really explain how you're putting, up in the mountains with pools with girls and Larry, but yeah, I mean, that is that.
Yeah.
Do you think
Something.
that the level of, because they were all having like this serial killer Cub Scout group inside CMC, that they had so much time to talk and fantasize and plan? Do you think that had they weren't in a group like that, that if they got out, it wouldn't have escalated as much? But they all fed off of each other, and
Yeah,
it was
100.
almost like,
I mean, even Schupman says it. Prison is college for criminals. And I was just talking to somebody about this. Actually, I was talking to some inmates about this, because Newsom is trying to make this more like Norway and stuff. But it's like, okay, just by abolishing death row, that doesn't really do anything. And I have actually said to people, what they should really do is have first-time offenders segregated. Okay, so these are people who just first time did an offense, they're in prison, they messed up. Okay, cool, but they don't get to congregate with the rest of the prison, so that it doesn't turn into a college for criminals.
Oh, yeah.
Right? That's what we really need to do. Isolate the first time offenders so they don't go on to a life of crime, or they're not inspired. They're not finding going to hobby shops and talking about sexual fantasies with these sickos. We got to segregate the first time offenders. And then I actually just proposed something to the Vacaville warden, which he might implement, which I'm very proud of.
Good job.
Thank you. It's fine. I feel like I'm actually doing something to help the system.
Honestly, that's huge.
Yeah. I had said to, a lot of these guys are fathers. And I say, what might inspire them to get jobs and start to work towards rehabilitation, is they start working these jobs, have some money for themselves, maybe if they can order toys for their kids who come to visit, right? And he loved the idea, and he said, well, we charge like a $5 surcharge, so like whatever the toy costs plus $5, they would have to pay for it, right? But we take that $5 and we put it towards programs like the Boys and Girls Club, which is geared towards prevention of crime. So that was so I pitched it, and he's considering it.
Yeah, well, I agree
really
with what
good.
you said before, as far as putting first time offenders, non-violent offenders, segregate. Because one of the first inmates I've ever interviewed, like in 1998, I was like up at Corcoran State Prison, and he was in for murder, but he murdered inside prison, and he was like a pot dealer in the valley in Van Nuys, and got busted, got thrown in there. And he was Latino, but he wasn't like full blown Mexican. He wasn't gangbang or anything. And then when he was telling me that, he was forced to align with the Mexican mafia, And so just because that's what they do, they segregate themselves, and they
Right.
and what happened was is that they came up to him. He was only in there for like 2 months. He was in there on a 2-year stint, and they said there's a guy in our group that can't keep up with, because the Mexican mafia, they wake up at the crack of dawn, they exercise together, they always wear their boots, they're always ready for battle.
Yeah.
And so this older Mexican mafia guy wasn't keeping up, and they basically said to the young guy, says, "You need to take him out. He's a weak link." And it says
Right.
either you take him out or we take you out. So he had to kill him, and that he was in there for life. Then after that,
No, that's the biggest problem too, is like that's prison. I mean, that's
yeah,
prison life. And these people are going in as, first time offenders. Some of them are so young. And it's like, if we don't isolate them away from, the career criminals, that's what happens, is they're in a do or die, survival of the fittest atmosphere, where they have to do things, normally they wouldn't do, but they're doing it for survival, but we can gear them away from that if we just segregate, from first time offenders towards, the career criminals. And I think that's a good preventative measure from having these first time offenders actually becoming, career criminals. I mean, there's a lot of stuff we could be doing. I don't think just, dismantling death row is
yeah.
the action we need to be taking. I think we need to be really looking at things that are going to help us and, prevent crime.
Yeah.
And
What about I have one more thought about that. What is your, because you said, what are the offenders that you're talking to think about Newsom's Norway kind of soft on incarceration method?
the other day, I should be saying this on air, but I couldn't help but laugh. And the thing is, okay, so I am very pro the European style. I'm 100%. I've actually wanted to, when I went for my PhD, I want to go study overseas to help implement it. Oregon has already started, and they have amazing results. But like I've said in past episodes, it has to be implemented properly. And, it has to be targeted towards the criminals that, that are in our prison systems. It's not like you can be like, okay, that's working, that's cool, let's bring it here. No, it has to be based on offender, going by offender. We can't just, just take oh, that's working, let's bring it here.
Not a blanket.
Not a blanket. I mean,
No,
I
it's
lived
not
in
a
Europe.
blanket.
I lived in
Right.
Europe for 7 years. Okay. In France, they do not have serial killers like we have here. I lived in
Right.
France for 4 years. I was a journalist there. And I've been to Norway dozens of times, have a lot of friends that work in parliament there and government. And it's a totally different world. First of all, the
It's a different
population
world.
is completely like 1/10 of what
Yeah.
we have. They don't have
Yeah.
serial murders. I lived in the UK. They don't have serial murders that often. It's very rare. I mean, it's not like here.
No, it's not. They don't have, I mean, especially California. California is the capital for serial offenders. I mean, I just gave you, Cindy, the list of all the serial killers I've interviewed out of San Quentin, and you were like,
I
oh
couldn't.
my God.
I just
I
couldn't
mean,
believe
yeah,
how many. I mean, it's just endless.
endless. I mean, what was I up to? 40 at the end of the
40,
week? Yeah.
all on
That's
death
what I'm saying.
row.
It's like, and there's probably like 40 total in Europe, is what I'm saying. And
Right.
then you have, they don't have the gangs like we do over here, especially California.
It's a different culture. It's a
Well,
different
I mean,
world.
California is a country.
I mean,
It's
yeah,
50
California.
million, 49 million people. I mean, it's like
I mean, the population of Europe is, I don't know what it is offhand, but honestly, you can't compare apples to oranges. It's just totally different.
So what I'll say is I am very pro what Newsom is doing. It just needs to be, I just need to see it implemented, in a better way. Like what I said is like, we're taking the first time offenders, we're removing them from the career criminals. We're doing more something. We need to separate the sexual offenders. First of
Yeah.
all, sexual serial offenders, especially. We cannot throw a blanket on our criminals in California or America, literally. They need to be, each one needs to be targeted. That's the way we're going to actually, tackle the issue of what has led them to a life of crime. And that's how we can help rehabilitate them and prevent crime. We can't just be like, okay, cool, we're just like Norway. And we want to be
No,
like
we're
Norway.
not. We're not anything like Norway. Okay, that's the thing that's so frustrating. It's a
No, I love
totally.
what he's doing. It just needs to be implemented in the
Well,
correct
that's
way.
part of the problem. It's always the execution. You can have a great
Yes,
plan,
exactly.
but if you don't execute it properly and you don't let it and you're not being accountable for that plan, and also knowing that you're going to have to change things as it's happening. You have to adapt and say,
Right.
and figure out what's working and what's not.
But I
working.
think he will. I mean, it's just the beginning of it. You know what I'm saying? So I do think that maybe long term his plan is a good one. It's just getting there. It takes time.
It does.
It's new, and it's a new way of doing things. So it's going to have some bumps in the road, you know?
Well, you know, that's what I think, you know, San Quentin has a great program they did a podcast, which is Ear Hustle, which is now everybody knows it. It's incredible. And I think that's a great way. And they have the San Quentin newspaper, which is run by inmates, you know. I think giving them kind of work and purpose, you know, the skills and the trade that they're going to need for rehabilitation. I think that's amazing. Like I said, there's a lot of fathers, if they start getting jobs and they can buy their kids toys that they can give to and visiting, but we charge them a $5, you know, surcharge, which then goes into preventative programs like, you know, the Boys and Girls Club. That's working towards, you know, not only tackling rehabilitation, but prevention of crime. That's what we really need implemented in our prison system. You've got to really look at the underlying issue and try to tackle it from there. And then also the prevention measures. And if you're lucky enough, you can find a solution for both. But I think, you know, there are some really good programs we need to, you know, still go. And I think, you know, the different offenders need to be treated, you know, based on their underlying need. Like Alan Pass said, you know, every different type of criminal has a different underlying motive, which needs to be targeted for, you know, treatment, for, you know, rehabilitation, or else we're just going to spiral and keep seeing a life of crime and career criminals, and they're just going to keep escalating, and we're going to be here with them in, you know, a freaking wood shop talking about putting ice pick their girls' ears and taking them up to mountains. I mean, that's the harshest truth of it, but it is true. You know, we got to stop it.
We do have to. So going back to Shupman and his letters, let's talk about Knott's Berry Farm. And I want to talk about Knott's Berry Farm because you know there's a victim from that time period. And you know that it's most likely linked to this group.
Oh, yes. Well, what I will say is, so I know these letters by hand because I've just read them since 2020. So what Shupman says, and this is how I figured out that these were not sexual fantasies, you know, because they would always talk about, I quoted him saying, you know, cabin in the woods, and a trailer up in the mountains and stuff like that. So Shupman goes on to say about a trailer up in, I think it was the Redding Mountains, where him and a few buddies had quote unquote party favors girls taken, and he says there were multiple girls chained up all at the same time in these trailers, and they rented, how they kept it off book was renting it off of a lumber yard. What's crazy about this is something very similar with the Lake and In case with the lumberyard company.
Yep.
And then I talked to two other serial killers who were like, oh yeah, I know about the lumberyard company. And I was like, wait, what do you mean? They're like, if you rent it off of a lumberyard company, it's not, there's no like kind of paper trail.
There's no paper trail, yeah. Because they lease the land.
Yeah.
That they're taking the lumber off of.
Right. And then they have all this isolated acres and acres and acres of land. So apparently this is a serial killer, quote unquote, hack, I guess, which I've learned about through Shupman, which is very disturbing. But he mentions the Redding Woods up in Northern California with some guys there with a trailer. What was weird to me too, and I don't know, I have not placed a connection to this, but I actually ran this by Travis, who you guys know. So BITTAKER and NORRIS used to always talk about this case, a very infamous case back in the 70s, where that school bus was hijacked by those guys. Yeah. And they buried
it. Yeah. It was actually recreated in the first Dirty Harry movie.
Yes.
With Clint Eastwood.
Guess where those guys ended up?
No.
CMC?
No way.
Guess what block?
The same?
D block.
Wow.
So I have audio tapes. I have letters from NORRIS talking about this, saying like, oh, did you hear about like the burying of the, the trailer or whatever? And so many times BITTAKER used to say to me, he was like, oh, you put the railroad tracks on top of the trailer so it doesn't collapse. And then I have literally multiple tapes of BITTAKER saying, oh, you just take a back. He goes, if I thought about it, I would take a backhoe and then put a trailer in, cover it up with dirt, put the railroad tracks on top so it doesn't collapse. And at the time, I didn't think anything of it. But then I found out, I like read Shipman's letter, then I find out they were all housed in same exact time, CMC, D block. So I'm almost wondering if BITTAKER and Norris also got this idea about putting a trailer somewhere, like with the railroad tracks burying it type of deal. Like that was all. I'm not saying it's true. I'm just saying it's always something I put in the back of my mind. Okay, so they were housed there. They've always talked. Both BITTAKER and Norris talked about this. It's kind of strange because they sent me all their fantasy letters. The other fantasy, so they had talked about the trailer up in the mountains, which I believe is Shupman, is the Reading one. Yeah. Then I found out that the cabin in the woods is actually real. That is Crystal Lake, where BITTAKER and Norris went, where they brought the girls. So like what they're talking about is fantasy is actually is memories or plans.
Yeah. Right. So potentially there could be a buried trailer somewhere.
Yeah. I wonder just the amount of both of them talking about it with me. Yeah.
Well, so much about rehabilitation inside prison when all they're doing is just planning.
They're just planning. Right. And this is why first-time offenders need to be separated.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
That's very dangerous to have them all commingling like
all
that.
Together, right? All in a little group. And what
you don't know, you don't really know. Like, okay, so you have a first-time offender, but you don't know if they have some latent psychopathic tendencies. You don't know if this is going to bring something out in them that maybe wouldn't have come out.
Who knows? Like usually, and this is very typical with sexual sadists too, is a lot of them will stop at the fantasy level. They will not cross over. They will stop at just the fantasy. But then, there are the ones that cross over. And like, obviously, we've seen that once the partnerships or brothels happen, they do bring it out in each other. It heightens the excitement. I mean, there's proof that it does bring it out of each other. It's crazy.
It's almost like a pack of wolves.
Yeah.
Really.
It's a murder club.
Yeah. So, I asked, some of these are really graphic. I really can't go into them.
All right. So Knott's Berry Farm. What do you know about that with them?
He goes, yeah, Roy and Larry both talked about Knott's Berry Farm and BITTAKER had told me this too. BITTAKER so he grew up near Knott's Berry Farm. Well, he grew up he went to high school by South Bay. So BITTAKER actually learned how to break into Knott's Berry Farm, and he would go to this gold mining place and like take the gold out of like the gold mining thing. So he was very familiar with the land and gold mining from, again, just like the San Gabriel Mountains from teenage years. So Shupman says, yes, they talked about Knott's Berry Farm. Roy later told me they picked up a girl right outside Knott's Berry Farm with a third guy.
Oh, here we go again.
JJ.
And he goes, I think I may know him. LOL. Happy face. Mm-hmm. Let's see. I asked him if he starts going about how he has all these creative sadistic ideas and fantasies, and I said, did you teach them about the hitchhikers and fantasies? He talks about, this is the Shupman's big thing, he said to me, all roads that lead to sand, meaning the beaches. Like you go for the roads that lead to sand, you'll find a girl, you'll find a hitchhiker. And I said, did you teach them that? And he said no. And he goes, trust me, BITTAKER is the one who taught me things. Ha ha. BITTAKER was very into the psychological sadism and torture. I was into that too, but BITTAKER was very into it, not just the sadistic aspects of the rape, but loved to do the mind, like literally put fear into the girls, is what he's saying. The psychological torture is what BITTAKER was into. Roy was just into the sexual fear of the rapes. BITTAKER was into the psychological aspects along with the sexual aspects.
Or as he like to say, pillow talk.
Pillow talk, right.
Ridiculous.
But BITTAKER was the one who taught us a lot of things. So he's obviously saying that BITTAKER has been a pro for a while, which we've known. And even Shupman's learned a lot from him. There was one guy I've been trying to track down who was also part of this group, and he was paroled at the same time they were. His name is James Fleming, and there's a lot of them, and I've still been trying to track him down.
Common name.
Very common name that I've been calling every James Fleming in the state of California. I'm surprised I found Joe Jackson because his name is
another kind of.
I know. But James Fleming I am still looking for. And then I have a John Blake, of course, like the most common names. part of this sexual group inside of CMC who were all paroled to Los Angeles.
Wow.
At the same time, except for Shootman, but a lot of them were. Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah. They had the same MO. I wasn't the quote unquote teacher that was BITTAKER, he said. And that's what I've always said. Like, he loved being the teacher. BITTAKER loved being the teacher. I can't even,
It's the teacher of the most sadistic things you could ever imagine. I wonder if it's because BITTAKER didn't have that bond with his birth mother, in the first couple of years of his life.
That messed him up because he was crying about that even in his 70s to me. About like, I just want, because I said to him, because I read the report from the 4 siblings, because when the appeals came up, they actually go and they interviewed all the extended family. So I had the report from the oldest sister of the 4 kids, the mother kept, and I kept saying to him, I go, you would have had an awful life. Listen to what your sister was saying about how awful it was. And he's like, it doesn't matter. I would have been with my mom. I would have been with my mom.
I mean, I don't have any pity for him after what he did to these girls,
No.
but I wonder if, like, psychologically that damages you as an infant and changes
Definitely.
your
100%, because you look at these serial killers, it really is, there's always seems to be a mommy issue. And it's true. I mean, the most primal bond we have is with our mother. A child being separated from the mother, I mean, that alone is already gonna screw us up, because that's the most primitive bond that we have. So yeah, I think that does have severe ramifications from it, or if we have a abnormal relationship with our mother, I think that sets us up for life. It's no excuse. I'm just saying, this is a primitive bond that is disturbed.
Let's be clear. A lot of people have complicated relationships with their parents. So it's like, it's just, it's the small percentage of them that turn into serial killers or drug addicts or thieves or just dysfunctional people who are functional in society. I mean, there's plenty of non-psychopathic killers, that are just walking around that, people work for. I mean, I've worked for a couple of psychopaths, it's like classic, and it's like, how is that person even thinking? How could they do that? What causes that?
You're just always trying to figure out why someone would turn into this.
Exactly.
How does this happen?
Yeah.
I mean, they're so sadistic. The torture that they put these girls through, it's just, I mean, you can't even wrap your brain around it. It's so awful.
When he was dying, I mean, this is going to be actually it's going to be a big part of the book. But when he was dying, like, I was getting at that point. I was like, I still don't understand, Larry. Like, I don't understand. I'm like, how do we get to this? Like, how are we at this level of sadism? Like, I still don't get it. And he was like, literally on his deathbed, and he's like, I'm trying to help you, like, trying to figure. He's like, because I don't know. And I was like, it doesn't make sense.
To me, what it seems like it's more like it's learned behavior, and then he just keeps on upping the stakes. It's almost like an addiction where he does it and then he needs more, and he needs more to get the same result.
He did say something to me to like try to, like, because I will admit, like, the serial killers do try to break it down for me in like a way I can understand, because I'm always like, I don't get it. Like, you guys got to break this down, because I couldn't hurt a fly. Like, I've never ever physically touched somebody violently, so I can't get on this level. And they've said to me, they go, okay, well, because I told them, like, since I was 5 years old, I was reading Nancy Drew, and here I am, as a criminologist. And they said, well, think about it like that. Like, it starts young, and then it just slowly progresses. You start reading more and more books. You go to college for it. It gets deeper and deeper and deeper. They're like, it's the same for us. And I was like, I can understand that. Yeah. So they try to break it down that way.
As a female, I know how it's difficult, but you lack the component that men have, and that's testosterone, which is a huge driving force in all of these crimes.
Which is what's interesting, because you said as he got older, when his testosterone levels dropped, that he started to change.
But I also want to say, that is very typical for antisocial behaviors. The traits decrease early 50s. I don't know why. On the Toolbox Killer, they were stating like, oh, they never go away. I don't understand why that was stated. It's been scientifically backed for years. They actually start to decrease at 50. It's not unheard of. This actually is a typical occurrence that does happen with antisocial personality. And one of the what theories is because testosterone is decreasing, and people just level out with age. We're not the same person we were at 20. We're not out there, at a frat house or something. People just, start to, slow down, and we just grow with age. And, biologically stuff happens to us, like what you're saying, there's a lot of factors that go into it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we're getting run out of time. So let's get to the thing that you wanted to tell us that
Okay.
let's get to that. So
I'm just going to skip to the last letter. Where is it? Because most of his letters are a little graphic. So he's kind of during our correspondence and on the phone, he was kind of teasing, I might be a serial killer type of thing. All right. So this was dated 5/30/20. Dear Laura, sorry, but I'm not going to be able to help you anymore or answer any more questions about Roy and Larry. I have been undergoing treatment for a blood disorder for the past 3 years. The doctors thought it was under control, but it didn't work out that way. I have the best doctors, but I've just recently gotten very sick. They have recently run some tests, and it's developed into acute leukemia. It's advanced. My doctor is one of the best out there, and if I have any chance, he's the one to treat it. But he says it's over, a matter of days or weeks. All they can do now is try to help me ease the pain and make it as comfortable for me as possible. I wish I could be around. There are a lot more stories I would like to divulge to you. Again, I'm sorry to end it like this. I really hate to break a promise to you. There's a lot more you need to know. Believe me, I really hate this. I wish I had more time. The only I can answer the one question you asked me about the hitchhikers. I can answer that now. There are 8, and you can figure out where they are.
Oh
Wow.
my God.
So he was a serial killer.
Oh.
And he ended it just like Larry. Yeah, there's a lot more, and you can figure out where they are. I've given you the tools.
So manipulative.
Mm-hmm.
Crazy.
Do you have his discovery or no?
No, I have his letters. He does give some locations in the letters.
Okay.
He told me the first thing he tells me is all roads that lead to sand. So it could be beach or desert, but he mentions beach a lot.
Yeah.
In the letter. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh well.
And I actually have contacted Jim Clemente because he was on the FBI's most wanted list for the murder in Virginia.
What did Jim say?
What did Jim say?
Jim was like, I read him the letters. He's like, are you kidding me? And I was like, I started with 2 serial killers.
I know.
And I was like, I'm up to freaking, I don't know, Joe is one, but now I'm up to 3 serial killers, 4 killers. The number of victims have now quadrupled. Yeah. And it's just like, figure it out.
Wow.
Oh my God.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Laura.
California. Yeah.
Yeah, California. All right. Well, listen. Crazy stuff as always. Fascinating. Your analysis is very fascinating, and we look forward to more. So we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah.
We'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Please visit our website where you can subscribe to the podcast, find show notes, and check out extra content from all of our podcasts. All rights reserved. This has been a production of 722 Media Content.